the International Conference on Agriculture and Forestry.
And today I want to talk about changes that are occurring in the animal production industry. And these changes are occurring because we want to produce more meat with the same amount of feed for the animals. And we're doing this in the United States and 26 other countries by using beta-adrenalic agonists or beta agonists in animal feeds. These animal feeds have been used in the United States and Canada for about 10 years, and they have been approved by the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization and the World Health Organization, but they are not approved for use in the European Union and many other countries. And so there currently are bans on US and Canadian meat products that contain beta agonists. And we're going to talk about how this all comes about and what this means, and hopefully at the end I will have time to share it with other research opportunities concerning controversial subjects. Now, beta agonists are medical feed additives that affect muscle growth at the cellular level. So the question is, are these hormones or are they not hormones? Well, of course, the industry calls them feed additives. You know, feed additives are okay, right? If you talk to scientists, we actually don't agree on what is a hormone. They aren't the same hormones that we had been given beef cattle for many decades, but they certainly do affect the animal, and so in that respect, they might be called hormones. So first one is zepateryl hydrochloride, and this is sold as Zilmax only for cattle, but there's been a problem. The problem is that the cattle have become lame, and because of this, the buyers of cattle have refused to buy cattle that have been fed this drug in the United States, and the Merck company has actually withdrawn this chemical from the market, so it's no longer being used. However, there's a second drug, Ractopamine, and this is being used in production of animal products. It's being used for swine and heavy turkeys and cattle. So the farmer buys this, the farmer adds it to the feed being fed to the animals. They gain weight faster, they have better meat, and the farmers make money. That's the whole object here. Here we have beef. The carcasses of beef are better because they have less fat in them. Hogs the same. And so they're reducing the amount of fats in meats, which for many Americans that is an objective for meat products, to have less fat. However, if you want a nice juicy steak, of course you want a lot of fat in it. The best steaks have a lot of fat, so those animals would not be fed these beta agonists. But other good lean meats would be fed, and they're certainly making producers a lot of money. These feed additives are only sold a few weeks immediately prior to slaughter, so the animals have to be in a confined situation. They cannot be out in a pasture or something like that because there'd be no way to get the additives into the feed. They enhance profitability, and 70% of the cattle were fed one of these beta agonists in 2012. This probably has been reduced now that Zilmax is no longer used. So here's the American public looking at it, and most of them haven't heard about it. So the American public is not really too concerned about it. However, there's always some firms that are concerned about it as a health problem. And so we have restaurants and Whole Food markets saying that they will not buy any meat products if the animals have been fed Ractopamine. And so this is possible. This is what they do, and they can advertise that their products are free from beta agonists. There's also public interest groups in the United States that are very unhappy with the use of these drugs, and so they are leading legal efforts against the manufacturers, seeking additional information, trying to get the scientific information about how everything works and what studies have been done to look at the health effects of Ractopamine on humans. So these consumer actions are ongoing. There's also advertisements and stuff like this against the use of this beta agonist. They're worried about Canada using it, and here's a picture showing concern there. 26 countries only use this drug, and 160 countries ban it. And that 160 countries include a lot of important markets for American and Canadian meat products: Russia, China, Taiwan, and the European Union. So Russia has banned this. Russia hasn't been too clear on why they're banning it, but they are banning it. China is banning it, and they have been more clear. The Chinese eat a lot of organ meat, and the organs do accumulate ractopamine, or the beta agonists, so it might be a health problem. Although Codex has approved the use, and so it has been approved, but the Chinese do have a good point there. The U.S. companies, it might be noted that Smithfield, our largest hog producer, has been bought by the Chinese, so is now owned by the Chinese. So what are the Chinese doing? The Chinese have decided we're going to make money. We will sell pork to the Chinese public that doesn't have any ractopamine. For the American public, we'll make money by selling it with ractopamine. So they're going both directions. Canada and the U.S. have both implemented a ractopamine-free certification program. Under this certification program, we can tell foreigners, foreign governments, and importers that we can guarantee that their meat product has not been fed beta agonists. So there's basically two meat sector markets with and without this drug. The international community looks to the UN and the Food and Agriculture Organization and the World Health Organization in setting standards for the use of chemicals and drugs in animals and in humans. And so this drug, ractopamine, has been looked at by the WHO, the World Health Organization, and the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, and their expert committee has approved standards for this drug. So we start with the FAO and the WHO. There's a committee that was formed. The committee then made a recommendation, and then this recommendation went to the Codex Alimentarius Commission, and then the Codex also has acted on this. So FAO, WHO approved it way back in 2004, that's 10 years ago, and then they adopted maximum residue limits in 2006, and in 2012, the Codex adopted by a very, very close vote the use of maximum residue limits in cattle and pig tissues. So the developments in 2009, the European Union appointed a panel of safety experts to look and evaluate the evidence. They said, we're going to do our own evaluation. Yes, we know the Americans and the FDA have done their evaluation. We know the Codex has done it, the WHO, FAO, but we want to do our own. And so that's what they did, and they did this in 2009. They used the exact same studies as were used by everybody else. I mean, there's only so many studies out there. Nobody else in the world really has any studies because this drug is not being used in Europe or Asia, really. It's being used in the Americas. So the only studies about the use of this drug are from the Americans and Canadians. And so everybody looks at the same science, and guess what? They come up with different results. Isn't that nice? Different results from the same science. And the European Union has higher safety level concerns than many other countries in the world. And this is why they reached a different result here. They felt that the studies did not prove that it was safe for humans, and so they maintain that they can still ban the use of meat products from animals that have been fed this drug. Now, the U.S. may propose to overturn the European Union's ban. We don't know if this is going to happen. We do know the American farmers have asked for it, but the government doesn't always follow what is asked for. They reach their own conclusion, and so it'll be interesting to see what's going to happen. A request would go to the World Trade Organization, the WTO. And this is the world settlement body for disputes, and they would look at the index. They would appoint a new group of scientific experts to look at it. These experts would come from all over the world. So there'd be Americans on the panel, there'd be Europeans on the panel. And as we know, the Americans and Europeans have different responses about the safety of the use of this drug. So if we have a new panel and we looked at it, they would reach a new result. And who knows what the result would be. Even though Codex has approved it, WTO doesn't have to recognize that all countries have to follow this. So there is some leeway here for disagreeing with Codex, actually. So the EU will argue, or may argue, that its risk assessment undertaken by their experts satisfies WTO's Article 5. So Article 5 of the Sanitary and Phytosanitary Measures Agreement does allow countries to have their own evaluation, and if the science supports a different result, they can follow that result. So actually, given this, there is no clear answer to this question. So who knows if the Americans will actually proceed with a dispute settlement, because they may lose. It's certainly not clear who might win. So the current state of the use of this drug is that production efficiencies favor the use of ractopamine. It's clear that we can raise more meat with less feed, and therefore we can increase production, which means we won't have to have as much pasture land or corn land for these animals to increase the amount of meat products being sold. We also see enhanced public awareness of the use of beta agonists. And what this means, who knows? Obviously, the Europeans say that they don't want it, and we know that. The Americans, we have a small segment that say we don't want it, but so far it's not too big, but this could change. Americans do change. They tend to follow some of the European safety efforts, about 10 years later, and so we may do this. The certification programs are allowing meat products to be sold from the U.S. that the animals have never been fed beta agonists. So actually, American and Canadian producers are able to meet both markets. They can sell to the rest of the world under this heading that these animals have not been. They certainly have a good apparatus, government check inspection service, the USDA, that could certify this, and they should be able to meet the requirements for some of the importing countries. So what does this study mean to all of us here today? For the agroforestry industries, we see from this example that new technologies generate health and environmental concerns. These concerns are important because we have to think about, when we're doing our experiments or when we're doing our studies, what's going to happen. The concerns not only include environmental, they include social, cultural, and political. And under environmental, I would place the health concerns. So there are a number of different concerns that are out there. And whether it's ractopamine, hormones, or clear-cutting forests, something like that, there's going to be different opinions around the world that are based on people's opinions. Now, governments have choices in adopting laws and regulations. Governments hopefully follow the people. Voters in the United States do force the governments to, our U.S. government or state governments, to do a lot of things. In the United States, we have a federal system where we have the federal government here and we have state governments below. But a lot of action on the regulation of agriculture and forestry actually occurs at the state level. And so we have some states in the United States that are known to be more environmentally friendly, like Oregon, Washington State, Minnesota, Iowa, Vermont. These environmentally friendly states have different rules for a lot of things, like water pollution. In fact, we just have new adoption of a law in Vermont that you have to label genetically modified organism food products. This law was passed this year for Vermont. which we're waiting for the legal challenges, because a lot of people think it's unconstitutional for this state to do this when the U.S. federal government, the FDA, is not requiring labeling for GMOs, these genetically modified organisms. So this is just in the United States. We have people from around the world here, and there's going to be various opinions and various decisions in countries around the world. So what are some of the other issues that might affect your programs, your research programs, or your industries? First of all is the genetically modified organisms. I've talked about that already. This is a very contentious issue in the United States. It is an issue that actually voters in California and Oregon have voted on, and they voted down labeling these products. However, as I said, the Vermont legislature has approved requiring label for GMO products. And another issue on GMOs in the U.S. is certain counties now in Oregon are passing county legislation requiring labeling and things like that. So we have a whole interesting problem of, if we have a federal regulation on GMOs, can states and counties have different regulations? And we don't know that answer yet. Presumably not. Then we have hormones used in animal production. This is also very controversial. The Americans have used hormones for a long time, but a lot of people in the rest of the world do not approve of this, and so they have had bans on American meat products because of the hormones. Third issue is antibiotic usage in food animals. A lot of animals are fed antibiotics to make them either grow faster or to make sure they don't get ill, because ill animals lose money. I mean, if an animal gets ill, it does not gain weight, it can't be marketed as fast as soon, and it may die, of course. And so we use antibiotics excessively in production in some sectors of the American meat production industry. Animal welfare is another issue. How do we treat farm animals? Can we put pigs in little cages? Can we put laying hens in little cages? This has been very controversial at the state level in the U.S. California passed a law in, I think it was 2012, mandating that any chicken in a cage has to have more room so she can spread her wings and flap her wings without hitting the side of the cage. Obviously, all the cages in California prior to that time are obsolete. They have to jump them because the cages are too small. So they're going to have to go to a different system. And so there's a lot of issues there. Final issue I'd mention for us is monocultures, and of course the big issue here is forestry. Monocultures growing forest products. In Asia, it's the palm oil plantations, right? And what does this mean to the ecology of the area, to the ecologies of the countries, and how is some of the developed world going to respond to this? Norway has become very upset with the use of monocultures in Asia, and they've told their oil investment company that they cannot invest in any company that has a palm oil plantation. So, you know, all of these issues are out there, and as researchers and scientists, we just need to be aware of them because it may affect our research. I just share with you a story about a very good researcher who came to the University of Georgia, where I am, in about 15 years ago, and he had worked at Monsanto. Now, you've all heard of Monsanto, right? So Monsanto has invented all this stuff, all these new crops, but in the animal industry, their first hormone was recombinant bovine somatotropin. What do you use that hormone on? What kind of animal? Anybody know? We use it on dairy cows. Wow, so the first hormone we use on dairy cows when we know that a lot of Americans feed their babies milk from dairy cows. Bad, bad decision, right? The scientists at Monsanto were in the clouds or something. They should have never started with a product that is used for children. You don't mess with children's health, right? but they did. And there's a lot of public opposition, and there's not a lot of use of this product today in the United States because it was just a bad idea. So we all need to be aware of these things as we go about our research programs. In the European Union, we know they're very hostile to the use of herbicides and monocultures and possible health risks from this. They have approved some new genetically modified organisms, but very, very limited. And I've already mentioned the growing hostility in the US and Vermont with the first GMO labeling law. Let's look at the animal production industry and the use of hormones. This was a big debate and controversy back in the 1990s. So this was a long time ago, right? But the lessons here are important. And this is what we need to realize as scientists. Not only scientists, but of course politicians do too, but we aren't in the political realm today. We're in the science realm. And you have to realize that things kind of repeat themselves, and don't make the same mistakes as scientists made 20 years ago. I mean, don't make the same mistake as Monsanto made with marketing a hormone in a product that's fed to kids. So back in the 1990s, the US started using these hormones. The European Union banned them, and the US won the dispute. Wow, great, right? Not so great. What did the European Union do? They kept their ban. They paid the penalty. Rather than allow hormone meat, they just said, we won't, we'll pay the penalty. We don't care what you do, we're going to pay. And so realize that there can be unexpected results. And just because something is legal, or just because Codex acknowledges something like a maximum residue limit in meat, doesn't mean that countries have to follow that. And scientists can't always appreciate that. You know, we like to think that things are right or wrong, or they have to be this way and they aren't that way, but there's a mixture here. There's a big gray area between the black and the white. And if you're doing experiments or working on projects, you have to realize that that area is there. And if you fall in the gray area, you got to be prepared for it. Now, antibiotic usage in animals, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration continues to try to phase this out, but they're still proceeding under a voluntary program. Obviously, a lot of people are not happy with this. The concern here is the use of antibiotics in animals may allow pathogens to mutate that will be adverse to humans, and that's what we're worried about. Pathogens may mutate and be bad for humans, and so we shouldn't be using antibiotics unless we really need them. So the EU has banned them. The US has taken a different approach. Plant and animal disease controls. This issue is also interesting. We have been successful in stopping the spread of bovine spongiform encephalopathy, or BSE, which is the mad cow disease. I don't know if any of you have followed this, but this started in Europe, and then we were concerned because a Canadian cow or 2 cows in Canada had it, and then we detected 1 or 2 cows in the US. But we took immediate action, and we seem to have stopped the spread of this disease. Avian influenza, we also have heard about this, concerned that whether or not this disease will come from China and get into our flocks in the United States. And so we have been successful in banning this disease at the current moment. Next disease of note for animals is porcine endemic diarrhea. This is a very new disease, only the last 2 years. It's in Asia and US live pigs. It's been deadly in the United States. Last year, 7 million piglets died in the United States from this disease. So we have real problems here, and we aren't sure what we're going to do about them. And then the last one I would mention would be coffee rust. We now think that this has been introduced in Central America. We do know that Sri Lanka was greatly affected by this disease in the 19th century. You used to grow coffee here, the disease wiped out the industry. And so these things can happen. And as scientists, these are kind of problems and issues that we work on, and we have to realize how they work and what decisions can be made and what these decisions will make. Turning back to animal welfare, there was a decision by the World Trade Organization in 2013 that actually the European Union won. And this is a very surprising opinion because the European Union stance was based on public morality. Now, morality is not science, right? I mean, you're all scientist type. Morality is something different, and yet here we found the World Trade Organization upholding something based on morality. What this means for the future, who knows? But I would interpret it to mean that the European Union certainly has a good argument to not use ractopamine because they are morally opposed to it. And so if they can win this first seal argument, they can win the ractopamine argument. The monocultures, we've mentioned it already. We certainly have programs out there, certification programs that are important in many developed countries in the world. I know if I go to a store to buy lumber in my hometown, I can buy certified lumber by one of 3 organizations and know that it was grown in a green fashion. It was grown to reduce the depletion of forests and things like that. So under monocultures, we're worried about forestry plantations, biofuel crops, and GMO crops. And there's no real bans. Everything's been voluntary so far. So voluntary meaning that there's certification programs, and those people that want to pay extra for certified products can do that. In conclusion, I have a few comments I'd like to share with you. First of all, new technologies will continue to challenge businesses, governments, and consumers. Countries will have diverse reactions to specific technological inventions. World health and trade depends on institutions that fairly respond to these concerns and differences in opinions. And we do have the framework there. We have the WTO, the World Trade Organization. We have Codex that follows the FAO and the other UN organizations. So they are out there, and they tend to work fairly well. Of course, there's times they fail. We do know that some well-to-do countries will place greater emphasis on reducing health risks and moral concerns through actions that discriminate. And we've already shared with you the European Union's actions on hormones, ractopamine, and other things that they're